Hey guys, how you doing? So the channel is Fighting Words. The segment is Tangent Tuesday. So the second Tuesday of every month, I pick a topic and I just sort of shoot from the hip and just run my mouth for a few minutes. So this week or month, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite fight scenes and why I like them. And I have a segment on here called Media Fight Mondays. I'm sure a few of you have seen them. And on Media Fight Mondays, I take a fight scene and I break it down and then I grade it based on realism and storytelling. and um, if you've watched a few of those, you'll know that there are some fight scenes that I enjoy and I grade them kind of low on some of those scales because I don't always look for realism. So, take for instance one of my favorite fights, which was Jet Li versus Jet Li in The One. Um, Long story short, uh, two guys, each played by Jet Li from alternate dimensions, are fighting each other. The turning point of the fight is when one of them begins to do a Chinese style called Pakua, which is um, a very circular style, and the other one is doing Xingyi, which is a very linear style. And we get to see these two styles in contrast with one another. And the reason I like that fight is because of this contrast in the styles. We have two people performing the um, the very idealized version of their styles, and it features heavily in the storytelling of the fight as well. So even though I wouldn't consider it realistic by any stretch of the imagination, it does look pretty cool. And the rule of cool is important. Like I think of the movie Only the Strong. I really, I remember watching it in the 90s again and really hyped up about it. I've watched it since. It doesn't stand up, but I really liked it at the time. And there's still a lot that I enjoy from it. I mean, I bought the soundtrack at one point, right? Um, but one of the things that to this day does attract me to that movie is that it's all about like all the fights with capoeira, you know, and capoeira is a very visually appealing style. It's backflip fighting, you know, um, and even though it isn't realistic, even though I can't pick a particular fight from that movie that stands out to me, I do like, you know, the fact that capoeira it's featured throughout and we have these cool looking moves and these guys doing really athletic stuff. um, there might be some camera tricks there, but I'm almost certain that there's no wire work. Guys who are doing backflips are actually doing backflips, even if it might not quite be the same actor that you saw before the cut. So cool does help, or in some cases very stylized approaches. I like some of those. There's a movie called Bunraku, and it's a very stylized movie. It's set in a post-apocalyptic future where everyone is throwing away guns, but everybody still fights. So they're fighting with swords and axes and stuff like that. Well, the very first fight in that is gorgeous because you have this guy who's you know he's in a suit and a tie and a hat and he's got these glasses on and he's fighting with a stick and his movements are very dance like you know and again it would rate low on the realism, and when I review it, because I'm definitely going to review that, it's going to rate low on that, but it's enjoyable to watch. And there's another scene in the movie where I think it was all done in a single shot, but it's or it could have been. editing tricks. But what we see is a guy running through this building, like a cutaway of it. And we got like, 8-bit video game sound effects throughout. And it doesn't make a lick of sense, but it's fun, you know. And so some of the things that I like, I don't like necessarily because they're realistic. Although I do confess that there are plenty of movies that I like because of the higher level of realism. You know, the first fight in Haywire. Um, you had Gina Carano, who was an actual fighter, and she's in a fight scene and she's doing actual fight stuff because she knows how to fight. And I remember in the trailer before, recognizing or Gina Carano or knowing that she was in the movie, they started playing the fight scene in the trailer, and I'm like, "Ooh, this is good. Who did they get to be the stunt double there? That's good fighting." Um, so yeah, movies are movies, but the element of realism in it is something that I like. Um, Similarly, if we go for like tone wise, again, I can't pick out a particular fight. I haven't seen the movie itself in years, but I sort of liked the style of fighting in Roadhouse because it was like, we're going to do karate, but we're going to brawl. So guys are doing things like crescent kicks, but also they're throwing haymakers and, slamming guys' heads into tables and stuff like that. So, it had a different feel to a lot of the martial arts movies we saw at the time, which were very clean and smooth. Um, we also have movies like, well, Return of the Dragon or Way of the Dragon, depending on where it was released. I've already reviewed the final movie of that, which is Chuck Norris versus Bruce Lee. And the fact that we have two icons, I mean, Norris, that I don't know if that was his first movie, but it was one of the earlier ones. Like, he wasn't a movie star at the time, right? But we see him and Bruce Lee face off. And, when I critiqued it, the biggest drawback to it, as I pointed out, was largely that, you could see a lot of space between some of their moves. There's no sense in blocking a kick that is going to land like 2 feet away from you. The choreography itself was really good, but I think it was just a matter of, I think in the movie industry they call it blocking. I just think they could have done a better job of positioning the camera so that it hid some of those things. You know, but that had a lot of realistic elements to it. A few things that weren't so much. But one of the reasons I like that fight is because we get a progression, we get a story. Because in the early part of it, Bruce Lee's getting knocked down, he's getting beat up a little bit. He's hanging in there, but he's getting the worst of it. And then he's like, okay, well, instead of like standing in front of this guy, I'm going to start moving around. I'm going to start using my footwork more. And that becomes the turning point of that fight. Going back to Jet Li, this is, I have a friend who's an author and she's been asking me questions about fight scenes. And one of the things I brought up, and eventually I'm going to make a video on how to write fight scenes for like literature. But rising and falling actions in fight scenes happen because, largely the thing that causes those things are I'm either trying to land my big move or I'm trying to keep the other guy from landing his big move. And again, going back to Jet Li, we got him versus the twins in Kiss of the Dragon. And, the smaller of the two is an excellent kicker, is just, kind of beating him up. and they're fighting in this office building. So finally, Jet Li sort of coaxes him to come into um, this cubicle area where every time he goes to kick, his leg winds up getting caught on on the leg of a desk or something, and he can't get his kicks off. And while he's sort of stopped in mid motion, that's when Jet Li's character fires off his offense. So he found a way to negate the guy's biggest strength. And I think that things like that are good. Like a fight that is not among my favorites. Seeing George St. Pierre and Jean Claude Van Damme face off in the Kickboxer remake or whatever. Um, there's a part of me that's a fan of both of those guys, and I was really looking forward to it. But the movie itself, or the scene itself, doesn't really tell much of a story. It's got a couple little character moments for Van Damme's character, but you know, you could have had anybody in those roles, and the scene would have gone on exactly the same. There was no sense of tension. Um, and that's another thing. Like, how do you build tension in fights? There have to be stakes. And I'm trying to not go into the whole lecture I gave my friend the other day, but um, you know, I was actually thinking about superhero fight scenes. Because I love the Sam Raimi Spider-Man fight scenes, like Spider-Man versus the Muggers in Spider-Man One. The ones who are chasing Mary Jane. At the end of it, they kiss when he's upside down, right? That had a very comic booky Spider-Man feel. Same with his fight against Doctor Octopus, or a couple of his fights against Doc Ock in the second movie. They were taking advantage of their powers and stuff like that. Um, but I was thinking about, like, one of the worst fight scenes I'd ever seen was Superman versus Zod in Man of Steel, because there are no stakes. You had two indestructible guys throwing each other into these buildings that were only going to be destroyed by throwing them into and I just thought about, like, if I had a fight with someone and we were in a room full of, like, towers constructed out of styrofoam and empty cardboard boxes, and our primary means of attack was to throw each other into those things that weren't going to hurt us. That's not building tension, because there's no stakes. I'm throwing Superman into a building isn't going to hurt Superman, right? So I don't know. There were a lot of things I didn't like about that movie. It's not a bad movie. It could have been better. Um, but yeah, stakes sort of make a good fight scene, in my opinion. Um, you know, like the final fight in the Karate Kid Part Two, um, where Chosen, right, was beating up Daniel, and he had to come back from that. The what's at stake is Daniel's going to lose. And usually that's the most obvious set of stakes in fight scenes, right? Whether our protagonist, whether the guy we're pulling for is going to win or lose. Um, but yeah, like, you either need to wow me with visuals, or you need to, you know, get me emotionally invested. Because excitement at, those were some cool moves. That is an emotion. But if our hero is in danger, you know, um, like, of all the Rocky movies, although, to be fair, I haven't seen the last couple of Creed movies, but I remember in Rocky Balboa, God bless him, just Stallone was old, and it was kind of a hard trick to pull off. But we did see in that fight that, you know, he was an older guy, he was in good shape, but, it's far past his prime. And his opponent, Mason the Line Dixon, I can't believe they actually used that. Um, but the champ comes in not taking the fight seriously, so he's out of shape, and then he hurts his hand by punching Rocky in the hip bone or something like that. And what are the stakes there? Well, we didn't expect Rocky to win, not really, or it was going to be really rough. But now we have a path to victory, and now, the tension is he going to be able to pull it off now that the champ hasn't come in at his best? And I'm not going to say that that's one of my favorite fights, but it's probably my favorite fight from that franchise. Again, the last two Creed movies notwithstanding, because I haven't actually seen them. Um, but yeah, those are some of my favorite fights and the reasons I like them. Rule of Cool plays into it. Um, the any kind of actual narrative storytelling does play into it. And you can have one or the other, and I'll be okay with it. I mean, when I'm grading them, maybe I won't grade one quite as high, but um, it's not like I can enjoy something because it's cool, even if it doesn't, even if it isn't realistic, even if the stakes are pretty low. But yeah, those are some of mine. Ooh, um, couple that I'm probably never going to make a Media Fight Monday for. Blood and Bone, which I think is an under heralded movie. We've seen some of the fight scenes. I think the fight scene in the prison bathroom has gotten a lot of play. But Michael Jai White's character Bone feels like one of those. The whole movie feels like one of those 1990s, martial arts flicks. So I like it for that. But there's a fight early on where he gets out of prison. Now he's got to make some money by getting into the underground fight game or something. It's been a few years since I've seen it. But he wins a fight with one punch. But we even get a bit of a story with that because the camera shifts to Bone, that's the character's name, Bone's view for a second. We see his opponent jab and then drop his hand, and jab and then drop his hand. So then we switch back to the long view, and the guy jabs and drops his hand. Bone hits him with a cross, which is exactly what you should do if the guy's dropping his jab. Come over the top. Excuse me. So again, very brief fight, but it told a great story. Um, and another one, and I try to stay away from like sword fighting scenes because my study of swordsmanship is almost entirely academic. I took like a 2 or 3 hour seminar on basics of sword fighting for the screen or something, and it was cool, but I don't know what the moves are called, right? Um, but anyway, there was a movie called After the Rain, and I think you can find it on YouTube in its entirety. It's not. It's a movie that has a couple of fight scenes in it, but I'm not sure I'd call it a martial arts movie. It's set in feudal Japan, centers around an out of work samurai, I guess technically a ronin, who's you know he's basically running a boarding house, but his wife sort of gently reminds him like we're running out of money, and he's been dueling for money, even though he's sort of presented as like kind of a gentle, laid back guy, but he's really good with a sword. Anyway, so there's this scene where he tries out to be part of this local lord's retinue. He's going to become one of his samurai. So he winds up facing off with a couple of guys. They're wielding bokken, which are the hardwood practice swords, right? And faces off against a young guy first, and the young guy just comes at him with aggression, like ah! He's just slip, just dodging the guy's attacks. Finally, just like whacks him on the wrist, you know, injures him enough to end the fight, and of course is respectful and bows. And they bring in a more veteran guy, And that's the part of the scene that I really like because, the veteran gets in his stance, sort of inches toward him, and then shifts as if he's going to attack. And you can see the guy, he's holding his sword out. He just like flicks his wrist a little bit and like just changes the position of his sword and causes the other guy to sort of pause. And it becomes more of like a chess game. And it's interesting. Eventually they do start, throwing sword strikes, but it's a cool piece of storytelling where you can tell like, oh, he's going to get me if I attack right now. And it happens a couple of times. The other guy moves in, and our protagonist just like shifts a little bit and causes the other guy to stop and back up, like, uh-oh. So he's smart enough to know that the other guy's that good. So again, probably not going to do a Media Fight Monday on either one of those. The one from Blood and Bone is just goes by too quick. The one from After the Rain, I'm not sure how I could do that one, but it's good and I would recommend it. And anyway, that's enough of me rambling. Thank you for joining me. You have a favorite fight scene, please let me know about it. If you have any suggestions, I'm taking requests via my Ko-fi account. Link is in the description. So yeah, if you want me to break down a fight scene, let me know. And that's all I got. So, bye.